What if 90% of your day didn't have to be admin? No more chasing paperwork, filling out reports, or copying information from one software or one spreadsheet into another. Most of the time-consuming tasks we do in a construction project, filling out reports, recording data, sending updates, can be fully automated. And when you free yourself up from this repetitive grunt work, you get more time to solve real project problems and drive the project forward to get better cost, time, and schedule outcomes. And what's even better, most of these tasks can be automated with simple or low-cost automation platforms like Zapier or Make.com, and you don't need any coding experience to do so. So in this video, I'm going to give you a complete guide to automations for construction managers. I'm going to walk you through why you should care about automations, what they actually are, 5 game-changing, incredibly simple construction automations we can build together, tools you can use to then implement these automations, then most importantly, how to think like a workflow designer, and some key takeaways and next steps so you can start implementing these on your projects. So to begin with, why should you care about automations? And it's not really a topic anyone talks about in the construction sector. Yes, we have software that effectively has pre-built automations, but no one's really talking about these do-it-yourself custom automations and the platforms that allow us to build them. Advances in no-code tools and AI, large language models, are making automations easier and easier to build and smarter and more capable. Construction managers, site managers, project engineers all drown in repetitive administration work. Our days are filled with logging site diaries, sending daily reports, filling out RFIs, tracking and reviewing subcontractor claims, updating schedules, following up on outstanding tasks, and preparing meeting minutes. This work, as we all know, is incredibly boring, but it's not optional. It's absolutely essential to the success of any construction project. Administration is unfortunately what keeps our projects running. A manager once said to me, "A good project is a boring project." And what he meant by that is that the chaotic, stressful firefighting is always a bad situation to be in. The repetitive, mundane, boring, busy work is what happens when everything's going according to plan. But this mundane, repetitive, busy work is absolutely essential to the success of any project. The real problem lies that we end up with so much of this repetitive, boring admin work that we don't actually have the time to focus on the tasks that matter. We don't get enough time to plan, prepare, and manage risks and look forward. Or even worse, we don't keep up with this administration burden and critical records fall through the cracks. Enter automation. No-code platforms like Zapier, Make.com, and N8M allow you to connect the different tools we use on construction projects and then allow us to put in simple step-by-step processes that automate these tasks. When somebody goes on site and takes photos, we can automatically upload these and store them in the correct folders. We can create an auto-generated site diary where a form is simply filled out, sent to someone via WhatsApp, they fill it out, and then we automatically create a weekly report. We can automate setting up reminders when an RFI hasn't been responded to, and we can automatically sync data between our cost tracking and our estimating database. All this busy work can be very easily automated. Now enter artificial intelligence. We can make our automations smart. Automations no longer have to be set step-by-step workflows. We can integrate intelligence and decision-making into them to make them much more powerful. We can now do things like auto-generate meeting minutes after every meeting with tools like Fireflies. We can create draft contract letters when a certain series of events happen. Say for example, we get a couple of days of inclement weather. We can set up an automation with AI in it that automatically generates a delay notice in accordance with our contract. We can use AI to continually be managing all our project documentation, looking forward and updating our risk register. And we can use AI and automations to track all the project correspondence and generate reports or insights into actions we should take. Unfortunately, repetitive busy work should be a thing of the past, but it isn't. Using automations and learning how to use these platforms is going to make you incredibly powerful at managing this sort of work. To really show you the power and capabilities of some of these tools, I'm now going to walk you through 5 example automations. These are basic, I put them together incredibly quickly, they're not very sophisticated, but it's just there to show you the power of what you can do. Now, to build these, I'm going to be using 2 main tools. Zapier, which is a no-code automation platform that already has existing links to thousands of different softwares. The other tool I'm going to be using is Airtable, which is like a Microsoft Excel on steroids. It's much better, much easier to use, and it's already got some really good integrations with tools like Zapier. You're not going to need to know anything about APIs or any other fancy coding techniques. To start with though, I want to give you a framework to first understand automations. Every automation has three core components. A trigger, which is what sets off or initiates the automation. This could occur when somebody submits a form. Say for example, someone's filling out a site diary, when somebody sends an email, or it could trigger on a set recurring period. Maybe it runs every day, every week, or every month. After the trigger, we then have an action or a task. This is what should happen in response to the trigger. For example, somebody fills out a form, the action is then to generate a report, store the data, or send an alert to somebody. This is where the data gets transformed. The final step is the output. What is the end result of the automation? Does a new record get created in Airtable? Do we send an email, or do we generate and store a file? So any automation you're looking at is always going to have these three components. There's going to be something that starts it, a trigger. There's going to be a series of actions and tasks that the automation performs. And this is more or less transforming the data. And then we're going to have an output. What's the end result? What is the automation creating? The first automation I completely built in Airtable, and how it works is it's basically a simple construction site diary. We get a form, our daily site report, where the project engineer or supervisor can fill out project information, status, weather, temperature, general notes, upload photos. Then for all the people working on the project, they can track the hours they've worked and the cost code they've worked under, and the quantity of work complete against each of these cost codes. So excavation, reinforcement, installation, concrete placement. This data is then all stored in our Airtable data records. So for example, for each of these diary entries, we get a new record installed, a new record in the table where we recorded what activities took place, who was working, how many hours they've worked. We can extract from that summary information against each of our cost codes. So rebar installation, site excavation, concrete placement. We've got a budget quantity, a budget number of hours. Then we can look at the total number of hours worked against that cost code, the total quantity completed, the percentage complete of the quantity, the percentage complete of the hours we've used, and we can calculate our cost performance index against that. And then finally, display this all in a very simple dashboard where we look at the hours worked against each task, the total, and present the key metrics to management, and also show some key graphs and charts and summary numbers. Now, we can extend on this and integrate some basic automations from Zapier. So the second automation I've created is a weather tracker. Tracking weather, it's incredibly important on construction projects because maybe in the contract you've got some allowance for inclement weather, and if you exceed those allowances, you're allowed to claim delays. But the only way you can do that is if you're tracking and recording any downtime loss from weather. So this automation runs every day. It gets the weather report and it stores it as an Airtable record. So I've added that as another table in my Airtable automation where every day I'm tracking the weather. All it's recording is the temperature and a brief summary, but you could extend this to record average rainfall, total amount of rainfall, total numbers of rainy weather, and basically justify any time you've lost. Again, it takes 20 minutes to set up and it can run for your entire project. The next automation I've created is going to take the records from our site diary. So it's going to use this data we've got from all our diary entries. We're going to use it to generate a progress report. So what it does is it runs every week on a Friday afternoon. We take our, 3:30 p.m. on a Friday every week. It's going to take our site diary information and it's going to use ChatGPT to transform this into a progress report that then gets sent as an email to our manager. So what we do, we set it to run every week on a Friday afternoon. We search for the relevant records in Airtable, which basically are all the records for the preceding 7 days. We then use a simple prompt to take these records as context. Then we give the instruction to ChatGPT. You're a construction project manager creating a weekly progress report. Analyze the site diary entries and create a professional progress report for the week. We want an executive summary, a summary of the work completed, any issues and delays, safety and quality, resource summary, upcoming weekly priorities, recommendations. Very basic. You can, again, tailor it and adjust it as you want. I've set these up in literally 20 minutes, so they're incredibly easy to create. And the final step in the process is it's going to send me every week an email with a summary of the work we've completed. And here you can see an email automatically sent from Zapier. It's ended up in my email inbox, giving a weekly progress report for the Downtown Tower project and mall renovation for the week ending the 1st of August 2025. It's giving me an executive summary, the work completed this week, issues and delays, safety and quality, resource summaries, upcoming week priorities. Again, incredibly simple. We can change the prompt, we can change the information it gets as context, but we can tailor this to provide the information or automate the task we need to complete for our project. The next automation I've created would save you hours on projects is a simple correspondence tracker. Now you can buy incredibly expensive construction management software like Aconex or Teambinder, which effectively does the same thing. But what this does is it tracks all your project emails. You could set up a dedicated project email address or a dedicated operations or projects email address. All the emails that get sent to that inbox would then be stored in an Airtable database, which this database you could then use to quickly search for things, to provide context to large language models. If you get into a dispute with your client, you could quickly find all the emails that client sent, all the instructions, all the attachments. So tracking correspondence is unbelievably important, and I've spent a lot of time hunting through my email inbox, finding for when things are agreed to from our clients. So something like this can save you a ton of time. It's unbelievably simple. It's unbelievably simple to set up. All you do in Zapier is every time you get a new email, which I've set up using my email address, every time I get a new email, I create a record in Airtable, which details the email, the subject, the body, the date, and the time. Then every time I get an email, it'll store it as a record in Airtable. I guarantee if you set this up once, it will save you $50,000, $100,000 the next time you get into a commercial dispute and you're hunting through your emails to try and find when something was agreed to or why you did a certain thing. Unbelievably powerful, but you can literally set it up in 5 minutes for absolutely free. So for my final example, I've got a slightly more complicated automation. The goal of this is when you get sent a new tender from a client, you might get PDF drawings, Word docs, scope of works, an Excel bill of quantities. We get sent a whole lot of different documents, and you basically want to quickly understand what the hell your client sent you. So the goal of this automation is for all this different documentation you get sent, you can quickly upload it, get all the documentation combined into a single context, and then send it to ChatGPT or another large language model to complete a quick analysis and give you a summary of the documentation you provided. So basically how this works is you get sent all your documents, you upload them into an Airtable form, breaking them down by the tender, the scope of works, the contract, the drawings, and so on and so forth. It iterates through all the different files, combines them into a big text file, so the PDFs and the Excel all need to get converted into a text format, stores them again in Airtable, and then I'm going to set up another automation where it automatically sends this to ChatGPT or another large language model and converts it into a concise, structured tender summary. So I get sent 15, 20, 30 documents. Automatically, I get an email in my inbox, which gives me a concise summary of what I've been sent, and so I can start to quickly digest and start responding to the tender. The purpose of this was just to give you a quick and dirty overview of what these automation software look like and the type of things we can start to automate. They're not perfect, they're just some very simple concepts, but again, start experimenting with tools like Zapier, start seeing what you can automate, and you'll be shocked at how much the repetitive, boring administration work you can begin to remove. When you hear about some of these tasks like automated site diaries, correspondence trackers, or weather trackers, you'd assume you need some sort of coding or computer science skills, and that used to be true in the past. Now you can build them all without a single line of code. You just need logical thinking and some basic understanding of different data structures. Really, the most important thing is the correct stack of tools. Think of the tools you need in a series of layers. You've got where the data comes in, so these are things like forms, emails, PDFs, schedules. What moves the data around, which is the automation platform. What enhances the data, which are things like AI models used for summaries or formatting, and where it ends up, in trackers, in folders, or as emails. Let's quickly talk about which automation tools do you need. The first one is the actual automation platform itself, the thing that's moving the data around, completing the tasks. There's really three main platforms out there: Zapier, Make.com, and N8N. Zapier is by far the best one to use for the type of tasks you're going to be completing. It's easy to use, it's got 6,000 pre-built integrations, so you don't have to mess around with custom integrations using APIs. It works with Gmail, Outlook, Slack, Airtable, Google Docs, Jotform, Procore, Asana, and I think there's also a Primavera P6 integration. It's perfect for simple administration tasks, logging emails, syncing entries, auto-sending documents, and it is by far the best one and the one I'm recommending using for construction managers. Make.com is another popular one that I've experimented with. It's pretty easy to use. There's not as many pre-built integrations, so you'll need to use APIs to integrate them. It's better for more complex multi-step workflows like delay notifications, document generations, and summary reports. It basically allows you to do more complicated workflows. Once you start building more complex workflows in Zapier, I feel like it struggles a bit and it's a bit more challenging to use. The final tool, which is the one that's more or less used by a lot of these specialist automation agencies, is N8N, which is an open source tool, but it has a much steeper learning curve and you almost need to understand computer or software development to be able to use it. I tried using it to build my tender analysis tool and I got way too confused. It was much more difficult to use. The next thing you're going to need is some sort of data source and storage. Now, there's a couple of different tools you can use. The most familiar of them being Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, which using Zapier, which allows you to talk to your Google Drive and your documents, you can quite effectively actually just use Google Sheets or Excel online for using this. The one I have found the most useful and the most powerful is Airtable, which is again very similar to Excel, but it's purposely made for integrating in these sorts of workflows. You saw the example I did with a construction site diary. That took me literally 20 minutes to build. It's perfect for site diary logs, correspondence trackers, tender trackers. You can use it to track subcontractor quotes, safety checklists, and it also allows you to very quickly generate forms. The next sort of data source you could use is different types of form building software such as Jotform, Typeform, or Google Form. They can be a bit more customizable than the forms that you're allowed to build in Airtable. But again, if you're using Airtable for your data, I would just use Airtable forms. And yes, Google Sheets and Excel, you can begin to integrate with these. I just find Airtable way more simple and easy to use because it allows all your different tables to integrate seamlessly. If you're trying to do this with Excel or Google Sheets, you need complicated VLOOKUPs and formulas, which if you're good at using Excel, you can probably build quite easily. But if you're not great at Excel or you want to be able to do things simply and easily without having to worry about tons and tons of errors and writing 30-line formulas, I would just stick to Airtable. The next tool you'll need is some sort of large language model or AI integration if you want to integrate AI into your workflows. Now, the most common of these are OpenAI, ChatGPT, which everyone knows about. There's also Claude, which is Anthropic, which is the large language model I use by far the most because I find it just much better at complicated tasks and reasoning. I like the style it writes in. And then you've also got Google Gemini, which Google Gemini I haven't used much, but one of the advantages of it is it allows you to provide a huge context window. So you're allowed something like 1 million tokens, which, for example, I've uploaded a 600-page contract into it and it's done a full analysis of that. That's roughly, compared to Claude or OpenAI, the context window is around 5 times the size. The final set of AI integration tools are the tools that are built on top of these large language models. For example, if you're doing meeting minutes, something like Fireflies will auto record and summarize. If you want to do research on the internet, you can use something like Perplexity. So often these tools you can also integrate. To quickly recap, to build great automations, you'll need a stack of tools. You'll need something to capture data, which is a form or a site app, which you can use for Airtable, you can use Google Forms. You'll need something to store and track and manage your data, Airtable, Google Sheets, Excel. You'll need something to move and process the data and actually complete the steps in the automations, which is the automation platform like Zapier or Make.com. If you want to generate insights, add intelligence to your workflows, you'll need a large language model, and then you can then integrate these with the existing tools you already use. For example, if you use Slack for communication, use Gmail or Microsoft Teams, you can then integrate these external tools into your workflows so they can do valuable and meaningful work. So far we've spoken about the different tools to use, what automations are, and given you some example automations. I quickly want to finish off by talking about some more general principles about how to think through and how to design these automations. Because if you start trying to build one of these automations, particularly if it's complex, you start playing with Zapier, integrating tools, and you haven't really thought through critically and systematically what you're actually trying to automate, what the steps are, what's happening to the data, it's going to be 10 to 20 times harder. And from experience, I can tell you, you'll basically spend hours building the thing, then decide halfway through it's wrong, go back, try to change it, and you'll keep going through this painful iteration process. It's not just going to work. So before you start building any of these automations, just sit down with pen and paper and map out exactly what's going to happen. And I'm just going to quickly talk you through how to go about doing that. We're going to look at very simply how to understand the inputs, the outputs, and the data transformation. So how do you transform a boring, repetitive task into something you never have to do again? Step number one is you need to identify what the repetitive task is. You should ask yourself questions like, what do you do more than once a week? What do you do on a recurring basis? What tasks feel like admin but are critical to getting right and getting done on time? Or what do you dread doing manually? Automations are perfect for anything that's repetitive, done on a regular weekly, schedule, or triggered basis. They're administrative heavy. You're copying and pasting, you're retyping, you're checking. They're essential but low value, like logging data, sending routine emails, and they're prone to error if they've forgotten. For example, as we've gone through, logging weather or daily site conditions, preparing and sending weekly progress reports, reviewing subcontractor compliance documentation, or tracking correspondence. Again, when you get started, don't be too ambitious. Pick something very simple and work out how to automate it. Second step is, so once you've identified the repetitive task, is you need to identify the trigger. Each automation, as we've discussed, has an automation trigger, which is what kicks off the workflow. There's three main types of triggers. There's a manual trigger where you start by clicking a button or run it on demand. For example, you submit a form in Airtable. There's a scheduled trigger, which is something that repeats on a regular time basis, so every day or every week. So every morning at 7 a.m. we fill out the site diary from yesterday, or every Friday at 4 p.m. we send a report to management. Then there are event-based triggers. So these are triggered by external events. Forms filled out, an email is received, files uploaded. For example, when we receive a tender package, that is the other type of, that's an event-based trigger. Once we've worked out what we're gonna automate, we've identified the trigger, we need to map out the workflow. So before we automate anything, we need to clearly understand what's coming in, the data coming in, what needs to happen to it, the processing or transformation of the information, and where it goes, the output. Bad automations fail because the data is in the wrong shape for the next step. Once you start playing with these automations, you'll understand how important different data formats are. I can't stress that enough. So what's the type of input data you'll receive? It might be a site diary form, which is got structured fields that you can break down. There might be a field for weather, hours worked, the quantity of work completed. That's a structured format. You might get a PDF, so an unstructured document, which will basically just be a whole chunk of text. You might get an email, which will be broken down into the subject, the body, the attachments. You might be integrating with external tools like using a weather API, and then you can look at the data that they provide. They might provide the temperature, the rain, the wind, or you might get a spreadsheet with certain rows and columns with data in it. So you need to understand what format the data is in to begin with. Then you need to ask, is the data in the correct format for what you want to do with it? For example, if you want to send all your site diary records to ChatGPT, you can't simply link your Airtable table to ChatGPT. You need to extract the data from it and get the correct data to provide it as context to the model. So you have to look at, is the data structured? Does it need to be cleaned? Do blanks need to be removed? Does it need to be filters? Is there essential information missing? Do you have to link records? You have to get the data in the correct format. Again, this is where you often run into problems where you might get something like an unstructured document and want to extract something specific. These are where the real challenges in these automations come in. You need to format data for different types of date, or time, or number formats, split it or join fields, add default values, or convert between formats. You need to map out this data flow to understand what data is available at each step in the automation. The next question you need to ask is, does it need, based on these data formats, and you understand the different formats that are available, does it need processing, calculation, or some sort of AI help? Do you need to calculate anything? For example, if you have the quantity worked, the hours worked on a certain cost code, you don't automatically have the cost performance index. You need to create a formula in Airtable that combines the two to calculate the CPI. If you've got a huge document, do you need to generate a summary? Do you need to process it with some sort of ChatGPT prompt to condense it or categorize it? Or do you need to tag or categorize the different sorts of information? Does it need to be grouped by project or by a certain time period? So some examples of this sort of data processing you might do is you might want to generate a summary of a site diary or a whole lot of free text fields and turn them into a condensed summary of what happened during the week with AI. For weather tracker, you might get the raw rain data, but you want to categorize it as whether it's been a wet day or not. So you use, if it's rained more than 5 millimeters, we classify it as a rain day. You might want to get some sort of tender log. So you might need to know the date the tender closes, but you get given an unstructured PDF from your client or some sort of email or different text formats. And you want to find for all your different tenders, what is the tender closing date? So you probably need to process that with some sort of AI call, or you need to review a different variation from subcontractors. Again, because all subcontractors will probably submit their variations differently. Some will submit them formally, some will submit them as emails, some will submit them as text messages. You'll probably need some way to extract the relevant information from that. Once you understand what data has come in, you need to understand where the data is going and what format you need it in. For example, if you want to, at the end of your workflow, you want to send an email, you'll need some sort of text to go into the body of the email. If you want to update a row in your database or your Airtable, you'll need some sort of structured text, number, date, or status value. And you'll need to understand the specific format the tool you're using needs it in. For Google Sheets, you need to understand where the data is going, what format, is it a number? To generate a PDF, do you need a pre-filled template and then to fill out certain sections of the PDF, or to send a Teams or a Slack messages, you'll need to format it as a message. So these workflow designs don't need to be complex, but I can't stress enough that you need to work step by step through the process to understand what data is coming in and what data is coming out. So for example, as an example workflow design, the first step is a form submission. So a site diary with the date, the supervisor, the notes captured in an Airtable form, and the trigger is when the form is filled out and the user presses submit. We then need to format and clean the data to remove empty fields, standardize the dates if we haven't set up our original data capture tool to ensure that the users are doing this. We then, every week, want to use and summarize this information using AI, which will give us a text output or what the call to ChatGPT has given us. Then we want to review this summary before we send it to our manager. So we want to add another status label to each of our fields, whether we've reviewed it or whether it's incomplete and ready to send. Then the output is to email it to our client and log it into Airtable. So this might be something we have to break into 2 automations, or it might be something we can capture in 1 automation. Key here is you really want to understand what data is coming in, what's happening to the data, and what is the end result you're trying to create, and what format does it need to be in. So I hope that helped. Again, the only way you can start to feel and actually capture the power of some of these tools is you need to start experimenting with them. The examples I gave were super basic, quick and dirty, and they were there to showcase roughly how these tools work and how you can begin to use them. My strong recommendation is the only way you're going to really understand how to use them for your business, for your career, is to begin playing around with them.